Hey everyone, welcome back to the next podcast episode. I think you're going to like the guest that I brought on today. There's this interesting thing in life where everyone picks out their own path where they want to go in life. And everyone, when they get to a certain point, they take a fork in the road and they have a choice where they're going to go. And that when they take that decision, it's going to dictate how the rest of their life looks like. And the guest today made a choice that only about 0.0001% of people ever make. And not only did he make that choice, he made a career out of it. So I think we're going to have a pretty interesting discussion today on what his life has been like up to this point. So, with that being said, I will turn it over to my guest for his introduction.
Thank you, Ken. I appreciate it. It's an honor to be here. Um, do you want me to, yeah, happy to talk about how I got here, I suppose. Make it easy.
Yeah, if you just kind of want to go through your background and kind of what you've done throughout your life.
Yeah, okay. So my name's Ashton Levarek. I'm the oldest of three brothers. I was born in Sydney, Australia, but my parents separated, and my mom, who's American, she came back to the US with me. We moved around a lot. My mom was a flight attendant. Even after she remarried, we moved quite a bit. So I got used to that mobile life, that reinventing myself with every school I went to. I lived in California, New York, Florida, and then graduated high school in Utah. And then I joined the military. I knew that I wasn't gonna cut it in in college because I had too much I wanted to do. And academia was not one of those things at the time. So I wanted to be challenged. Um, Maybe it stems from, I'm 44 now, so I look back on a lot of this stuff all the time, but it might have stemmed from, my father running off when I was younger, and I wanted to prove that I was man enough to do everything on my own. But I joined the Coast Guard, became a rescue swimmer for the Coast Guard. Um, that was a tough selection in itself. I did that for about 4 years, and then as the war kicked off in 2001, 9/11, 2001, um, I said, what could be harder than going to war? And so I decided to pursue a career in special operations. I looked at the SEALs. That didn't appeal to me as much. I was a rescue swimmer at the time, so going into pararescue kind of made a sense to me. So I essentially sold all my stuff because they weren't taking prior service, and I put my name on a waiting list to get into the Air Force to go pararescue, or PJ as they call us. And I ended up waiting about a year and a half, just traveling the world with a backpack and my surfboard and my snowboard. And then they gave me a call, hey, we can take 25 people, prior service guys. And that was in 2004, no, sorry, 2006. And that's when I started my pararescue career. Joined the Air Force, went through the pipeline, 2-year pipeline, got stationed in Okinawa, Japan. And then I put in my packet to go to an elite unit um, out of North Carolina. And I went through another selection to get into that one. Um, and I spent the last 10 years there in North Carolina, working with some of the greatest military minds and athletes, tactical tacticians, whatever you want to call them, some amazing people, learning from, growing from, and working around and with these guys overseas. And it's been an amazing career. I look back on it with a lot of pride and honor. It was an honor to be there. And I learned so much, but at the same time, it really had a impact on my life, on my family. I had two little kids by the time I left the military. I had a marriage that was crumbling at the seams because I was never home. I was never around for my kids. And as a man, I mean, you're kind of expected to be the protector and provider for your family. And I was just not doing that. My excuse was, my nation calls, my duty. This is my duty. This is my what I'm called to do, and this is how I pay the bills. But at the same time, like, you have to be there emotionally for your kids and for your family, for your wife. Um, you have to be the masculine in the relationship, and so really that propelled me into a whole nother career. And we started investing in real estate to create financial freedom so I could be there for my family, be the man that they needed me to be, while still paying the bills and be at home. And so now we have a real estate portfolio, a rental portfolio that pays for our lifestyle. We live in Costa Rica and travel the world as a result of it. So it's been an amazing ride. I've done a lot of cool stuff. I have about 15 combat deployments at this point, in 21 years of military service. And then we were able to build up almost $100 million real estate portfolio too over the last 6 years. So we've had a lot of experience both from the military and then building a business, building a family, rebuilding a family, I should say. And it's been awesome. It has been amazing. I don't regret 1 minute of it. So yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome, man, and it's super respectable because I'll tell you what, that's one hell of a career path to take. So something I wanted to ask you, because going and becoming a PJ, it's my understanding is it's a little bit different than the other special operations units. The focus, they have a unique focus for their mission, and I'm wondering what was it that got you interested in becoming a PJ specifically?
Well, coming out of the Coast Guard as a rescue swimmer, I was an EMT basic. I had a lot of experience in the water. I love being in the water. So that was natural. I did look at becoming a Navy SEAL, but they wanted me to do 2 years on a boat. And I was like, nah, I'm not doing that. Pararescue, they had some of the best training. They get to do everything. Whereas, like, if you go Special Forces, you go Ranger, you go MARSOC, you go Navy SEAL, you might not get some of those special operations communities. You don't get dive right away. You don't get combat dive. You may not get free fall, which skydiving, basically Halo. And you can be limited to certain areas. For example, if you go in special forces, you might be stuck on a mountain team, or you might be stuck on a Halo team and you never get dive, or so then you get stuck in a region based on the language you speak, but also on your skill set. And you may or may not never get to do those other skill sets. And I wanted it all, man. And I found out when I was doing my research as a pararescue jumper, if you go to a special tactics squadron, you get attached to and deployed with SEAL teams, special forces teams, Ranger battalions. You do it all. And so you get all that training. It's 2 years of training, which may be a little bit longer than some of the other special operations groups. But you get all that training so you can go do all that stuff. And then you get paid really well because of it. And so I was lucky. Every time something like that came up, I put my name in the hat, deploy. I volunteered to deploy. I volunteered for sniper school. I volunteered for mountain schools, all these different. It was a blast, man. Coming out of the mountains of Park City, Utah, where I graduated high school. I was into rock climbing. I was into snowboarding. I grew up surfing. Man, I want to do everything. So that's what kind of pushed me to it. And I wanted to do the hardest thing I could find too. So that was the second part. Yeah.
So, so you were talking about how the training, there's so many different things that a PJ does that some of the other guys in special operations units might not really get to do, and you're doing all these different things. What was the training pipeline like for the PJs? Like, what sets it apart from, let's say, a SEAL or MARSOC?
Well, so not only do you have to be able to shoot, move, and communicate, which those are the three, the core, the basic skills of soldiering, of being a warrior, an operator. A PJ must be trained in medical. So he's a paramedic, he's a combat medic. Um, and but he also must be trained in extrication. So you think of what like firefighters do when they cut bodies out or cut trapped victims out of car crashes. We do the same thing with vehicles, but also with aircraft. That's where they were originally, PJs originated from, was rescuing pilots in Vietnam. It's since changed a lot. Um, and now we do a whole bunch of stuff. But so yeah, you get to do that. You do the medical, the extrication. You also do subsurface rescue, underwater rescue, and recovery, because most of the time, if it's underwater, it's recovery, unfortunately. You also do mountain recovery, so high angle stuff. It could be high angle in a city off buildings, but it could also be high angle up in the mountains. You also do, cave rescue. You do everything. I'm trying to think what else we do. So they call us, we call ourselves, or somebody came up with this. I don't know. We grabbed it and ran with it, but jack of all trades, master of none. And there's because you do so much, you do so much. So, a regular training year for a pararescue jumper is going to be obviously you're going to do shooting, you're going to do, small unit tactics was the moving part. Then you're going to do shoot, move, and communicate, all your stuff, how to do those basic skills. You're going to do all that stuff, but then you're going to go to driving schools, you're going to go to medical schools, you're going to go to high angle rescue schools, diving, jumping, like your year is going to be packed, and then tack on a deployment, a 4 to 6 month deployment, like you are gone all the time. And for somebody like me that has, I don't know, I wouldn't say I have ADD, but sometimes I feel like I do. Like I always want to be doing something. I always want to be chasing something and getting better at something. And it allowed me to do that. And it was a blast, man. Like even when eventually I became, a team leader and one assistant team leader and then team leader, and I was able to schedule like what trips we get to go on and things like that. And we were more or less during the GWAT time, Global War on Terror times, there was a lot of money being pushed towards special operations because a lot of the operations that were being done by guys like us. And so in the Air Force, we get cut pretty good. We get a check to go do whatever training we can justify. And so guys were going to, and you got to understand, it was all, validated. We were using it overseas, but we got to do some unbelievable things. Like guys, I mean, even this on the civilian side, like the guys that are at the guard units that are doing civilian rescue, they're doing unbelievable stuff, like jumping into the Pacific Ocean to link up with like a cruise liner so they can rescue somebody that's had a heart attack or had a crane fall on them. Like all that, like they're doing that in civilian times. And then over in war times, we're attached to these special forces units or we're flying medevac. Um, so yeah, you get to do quite a bit of stuff. And it is honestly like I think it was one of the coolest times of my life to do some of that stuff. And yeah, so I don't know. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, that's yeah, it sounds like a definitely a unique job. And so if I'm understanding this correctly from what you're saying, so there's definitely elements of combat to it, but would it be safe to say that the heavy focus of a PJ is more on the medical and search and rescue side of things than it is being in direct action?
Yeah, yeah, it is. When we get attached to a SEAL team or a special forces team, it's typically as the medic. Uh, but we have all the other skills, these other skills for extrication, which when there was all these roadside bombs going off, these IEDs, that became very sought after in medics. Additionally, like these collapsed structures in Syria and in Iraq, when these bombs were going off, same thing, like getting bodies out, getting people that are trapped underneath. Guys with skills to do that I mean, that's very sought after. If you're a ground force commander in one of these operating areas of operation, these AOs, like that's very important, like that's one of the number one things to come back with all your men, all your equipment and sensitive items. And to have a guy on the team that is an expert at um, getting these out of places that have been destroyed, like that's a big deal. So it's great to have a medic on there. It's great to have a medic that can shoot and move and communicate, but it's even better to have a medic that can do all this other stuff too. So they became highly sought after. Unfortunately, not all Air Force commands were willing to farm out PJs to some of these other military units. And that's simply because, they wanted to keep a lot of the PJs on short leash to go rescue the Air Force pilots if they ever got shot down. So there was kind of there's a struggle there for assets, like everything, it's always money and relations, right? So, but luckily, like my last 10 years, I was at a special tactics unit, which that is the only thing we do. We do search and rescue for these elite units. So we'll fly overhead when some of these missions are done. But then we'll also be attached to the teams that are doing, all sorts of missions overseas. So,
Awesome. I
yeah.
got you. So when guys are going through training, I'm sure you guys probably had a pretty high washout rate,
Mhm.
similar to like a lot of the other teams. The guys that make it through the training and they go out and get assigned to a unit, what would you say are the characteristics that carries somebody through that 2 years of you're getting beat up every day? You got a million things to learn. You're probably sleep deprived, I'm guessing, and you're getting run into the dirt. What is it that separates the guys that make it through from the guys who don't?
Um, Yeah, that's a good question. I can tell you, I can tell you a couple things. And this goes to anything. If you're starting a business, if you're starting a family, if you're starting special operations selection, like what is your why, right? If you don't have a strong enough why, the moment it gets hard, you're going to come up with excuses, right? Um, I remember in selection, this happened both in rescue swimmer selection and then, of course, in pararescue selection as well. But I remember standing there and guys talking about their shin splints, and then the instructors, they know what they're doing. They're like, "Hey, does anybody want to talk to the doctor today? They're going to come down and look at everybody, and make sure you're still, physically fit enough to go on with the training." Right? They've opened the door. They do that on purpose to open the door to let you come up with your own excuses, right? And I remember turning to a couple guys, I was like, whatever you do, don't go to medical. Don't go to medical, right? Because right there, once you do that, you acknowledge I'm in pain and this is a way out. Whether it's consciously or subconsciously, you're finding an excuse not to train that day. And I don't know if instructors write it down or just make a mental note, but I'll tell you, the guys that started seeing the doctors regularly, they were gone within 1 to 2 weeks after doing that because they were given an excuse, right? Um, and again, like this goes to anything you do as a man or as a woman, I should say. If you don't have a strong enough why, if you don't know why you're there, um, yeah, you will falter. And if that why is not renewed over and over and over and over, uh, you will fail, you will falter, you will quit, and you'll quit either mentally saying, "I quit, I'm not doing this anymore," or you'll fail or quit physically to where this is really tough, this is really tough, this is hard, and injuries will manifest through that in your body. I don't care what you say about this, whether I'm talking foo-foo or not, but guys that have been through this, they know when you come up with excuses, your body eventually comes up with an injury to help you live out that excuse, that mental breakdown. Um, and look, it's not for everybody. I'm not telling you like people quit, people fail, and that's probably for the best sometimes, honestly. But I will say, when I went to this other selection to come to this unit in North Carolina, the selection is a lot tougher. It's a lot more mental, a lot more psychological. But we did these psychological tests, psych evals, which I never got to see the results of when I went through the initial screening to become a PJ. But after becoming a PJ and then coming up to today, what's called a DISC profile. I don't know if you've ever seen that. It's DISC. And most of the guys in there, the majority of them were D's and I's. And D is like domineering. They want to be in charge. They want to be challenged. They have really high standards for themselves and really high standards for other people. Oftentimes, because of that, they come off as really rash or brash. They come off as dominating. They come off as rude, maybe. But they hold themselves to really high standards. And then the I, they're very influential. They like to be the center of the spotlight. Like I'm a DI. Depending on what situation, I might be a very high D or I might be a very high I. And if you haven't done this test, I would go check it out. You can find it for free on I think Tony Robbins' website used to have it for free. And then the other two, there wasn't many of the other two. And over the years, I've found out why. But so it's SC, and I can't remember what those other two stand for, but it's typically people that are more detail oriented and they overanalyze things and they have trouble thinking outside of the box because they're very good rule follower. They're very good, like this happens, then this happens, then this happens, then this happens. And in special operations, there's more free flow thinking, there's more outside of the box thinking, there's more, well, there's a phrase, we'll do it on the fly, that kind of gets thrown around, which is not how you should do missions, but that happens. And guys that aren't comfortable with figuring it out on the fly, they tend to have more anxiety and more apprehension about the things they're going to do, right? So, for example, if we get up in the air and we're going to jump, and I'm like, we can't really see the clouds, but I know because of this, we're over the drop zone. That might give certain people a lot of anxiety because they're not sure if they could, for some reason, they don't trust in themselves. They don't trust in the jump master who's putting them out of that plane. And so that would give them a lot of anxiety. Like, check my chute, check my altimeter, make sure everything, like they're really freaking out. But some guys, like the DEIs, tend to be like, all right, let's do it. We're going to figure it out. And those guys tend to stick around longer in special operations because they have faith in themselves. They have faith in, you know, in their team. But also they know they can figure it out. And they're probably not going to back down even if they don't think they can figure it out. So
Yeah, that
that's just my opinion and my experience. But yeah.
that definitely makes sense. So if someone's watching this and they're looking at potentially going into doing something with special operations, so what you're saying is that by far the most important element is you need to figure out why you're doing it. It's not necessarily the strongest or the smartest,
Yeah.
it's the fastest, whoever. It's not necessarily those people that are going to make it. It's the person who really has dug deep into what it is that they want out of life.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I think the guys that haven't done that, they will falter the fastest. Um, yeah. And sometimes it's as much as little as just I have something to prove to myself, you know. I'll tell you a quick story. Like we had a guy, he was an Olympic hopeful. We had a couple guys that I think were like Olympic hopefuls as far as swimmers go. And this guy would break school records, break for the selection I was in. And they would break swim records like every time we swam. But it came to time for, they call it Hell Night. It usually goes on for a while, but it starts during the night. And we're doing what they call duck walks around the pool. And you're just your hands on your head doing duck walks in between different stations before you go swim. And we hadn't even got in the pool yet, just done a ton of running and rucking and other calisthenics. And now we're just all we're doing is duck walking. And he quit. And I was like, wow, so it really isn't physical ability. I worked with a SEAL. He was I want to say he was about 5 foot tall. Like he was 5 foot tall. He was a small guy, but he had that fire, he had that drive. And so it's not about size, it's not about athletic ability, which a lot of people think. It's not about physical preparation even. It is absolutely 100% about that mental, about that why, and that drive to stay in it when it gets hard. And that's what we want, right? Those are the kind of guys you want in that position anyway.
Yeah, definitely, because the mindset aspect of that is definitely super important. So, okay, so by this point, someone is out of training. They've gone to their unit. They're going out on missions. So at this point, when you're a PJ, what are some typical things that you run out into on an engagement? You end up in a firefight, let's say, and things just start going to hell. What is a PJ? What is it they're doing that's a little different from other units? Let's say a SEAL or a Ranger.
Well, I'm going to only speak from my experience. I was never on a standard. So there's two types of units for PJs. There's rescue units, and those guys do typically CSAR, combat search and rescue. They're attached to a helicopter. That helicopter gets a call. They fly out with a team of PJs, land, or they fast rope in or something like to that nature. They get down there, secure the site. So secure typically means, secure it from enemies, from bad guys. And while a couple guys start collecting the casualties, loading them up and getting them ready to exfil. And that's a typical rescue unit. For me, I never did any of that. I went to the special tactics squadrons. So I did CSAR one time, combat search and rescue, in support of another unit that was doing, that was hunting bad guys. And we would circle above waiting for something bad to happen. And that's when we would go in. So for that one, we work with rangers, and they would set up the cordon and secure the area so that we could go in and get everybody. What happened that night was we had a helicopter crash and rolled over, and a bunch of rangers got hurt. So we secured the site, exfilled everybody. Was actually pretty standard, but that was the only time I ever did anything traditional pararescue jumper type mission. Every other thing I did was I was attached to a special forces team or a SEAL team. And in that case, I am typically at the back of the stack if we're talking about clearing a building or assaulting a compound or something like that. Although oftentimes you end up at the front of the stack as the first shooter, just because of how many doors you enter, how many people peel off and stuff like that. So again, you're just doing the job of a shooter until until things, the proverbial, can I cuss on here?
Yeah, yeah, go ahead. I use F-bombs.
Okay. When the proverbial shit hits the fan, then it changes, and then we become the medic, right? And so we have to, if anybody that's familiar with the military, they're going to understand this, but TCCC, so it's a form of care, of patient care that we use in the military, that was developed because of everything that we've learned over the past 20 to 30 years. And it used to be like, oh, somebody gets shot and you jump down and you grab them and start working on them. But now it's you return fire and you don't treat the patient until you've won the battle. And once you win the battle, while you're doing that, you might throw the patient like some tourniquets or something like that to start so he can start treating himself. But then once the battle's won and the site is secure, then you can drag him out of harm's way and start treating him and then exfilling him, getting him to a helicopter or a vehicle to get him out of there. But that is all my responsibility at that point when that happens. But up until that point, like really, you're just another shooter at that point. Obviously with another skill set in case stuff happens. But yeah, I mean, things happen all the time. People don't realize like it's not always, guns and bombs, like people dehydration, broken legs. I exfilled a guy for a torn ACL, like he twisted his knee and just, like he can't hike back out. We used to do these long, long hikes in. We'd get dropped off 8 to 10 kilometers away, hike in, and then do the job, and then, hike back out and get picked up. But yeah, he twisted his knee, going through in the dark. And so we had to exfil him for that. No guns were shot that night. Just, so like your job's pretty diverse, but really the primary is you're carrying a med ruck. You have all your med supplies, typically to treat, three or more casualties. There's usually two medics or more, depending on how many people are going on the operation. But yeah, so you have quite a bit of equipment. So you have to be good to go to hike far and fast with a lot of weight. But yeah, I mean, that's it. That is it.
I gotcha.
Yeah.
Was there ever a mission that you had that you can think of where it just of all the stuff that you ever did where hell just completely broke loose and it, just the craziest encounter you ever had to give someone a perspective of, you're going into one of these units. What is one of the, like what could they expect as far as maybe a worst case scenario where things just are falling apart and you've got to try to hold things together?
I was really lucky in the sense that I never got into any situations where I thought this could be it. But I'm also very optimistic, and I have always had an attitude where whatever happens, we'll figure it out. And so maybe it's just perspective. I don't know. But I guess one of the hairiest, I don't know, the hairiest mission would be, we were going after some guys that were hiding out in Afghanistan, and we landed the helicopters and immediately like started receiving reports that people were ambushing us, or moving out of the village nearby to come and engage us. And we weren't even supposed to. We weren't even going to that village. We were actually landing nearby that village so we could hike over the mountains. So the people that we were going after, they couldn't hear our helicopters, and which is pretty standard. So we were doing. It was going to be like an 8 kilometer hike. And I don't know what altitude we were at, but I could not breathe. But here's the thing: when you in special operations, it's very specialized, and so instead of turning around and fighting these guys that wanted to come get it on with Americans, right? Because they're young, they want to, I don't know what they were thinking. There was only 20 of them. We just walked off. We walked in the direction we needed to go, and our combat controller, which is another Air Force Special Operations career field, he's calling in airstrikes on them. So we never even saw these guys. We just got reports of them and that they were moving behind us, and we just moved off at a brisk pace and started hiking. And I remember just being so out of breath. Like I was like, I'm gonna turn around and watch the light show because there were bombs and gun runs, and it was just insane because we're up above it at this point. We're up in the on the side of this mountain going over this saddle. And I remember I was like, I'm gonna turn around and watch it. And I say that with quotes because I needed to catch my breath. And I turned around to watch, and it was just unbelievable. Just these, planes coming in, and you know, they did their job. Then we walked off and walked through the mountains, get through the saddle, and then we cleared like several compounds, and we couldn't find the people we were looking for. And supposedly, like there was word that they had snuck off into they call it the green zone, into where all the trees were. And so we put a little team together to go get them. And the planes overhead were pointing out where they were supposed to be. And they didn't see any, uh, weapons on them. And so, but the dog couldn't pick up their scent and couldn't find them. So we got online. So imagine, an arm's length from the next guy to your left and right. He started walking through these cornfields. And all I can say it was something out of like Predator maybe, or Vietnam or something, because it's dark, you're on night vision goggles, and you're just pushing corn stalks out of the way with your weapon. And at any minute, like you're like somebody could pop up right in front of you. You couldn't see like 2 feet, 3 feet ahead of you. And all of a sudden, a machine gun goes off, and the dog goes ape shit. And the dog bolts forward. Finally, he picked up their scent. And I think, honestly, looking back, I think the dog actually probably saved a lot of guys' lives because they were sitting in ambush. We only thought there was two guys, but it turned out I think there was like six, maybe seven, in an L shape, which is pretty standard for an ambush. And yeah, I think as soon as the dog went, the machine gun went off, and then somebody said, "Watch out! They have a PK, which is a big Russian-made machine gun." And but that dog, I think, scared them the most. And right after somebody said, "Look out, they have this machine gun," I saw a guy within 3 feet in front of me, and the guy to my left saw him as well. And we engaged him. And initially, I dropped to my knee because you hear a gun go off, and you don't know where it's coming from, and it's super loud, right? It was so loud because it was so quiet right before that. Um, but as I jumped up from my knee, engaged that first guy, and then everybody, it just broke loose. And I would say we were very lucky, but at the same time, I think a lot of it had to do with the training and how we used the dog. I say we had a dog handler with us, another SEAL. Um, and so that was probably the craziest part of my career. Everything we did, it was always super sneaky. So we would sneak in, and half the time people wouldn't even know we were there until we were waking them up in their sleep. Um, so uh, it's not very entertaining. That was probably the hairiest, one of the hairiest nights. I had one other one, but one of the hairiest nights of my career. But we had to run out of there because the sun was coming up. So again, I'm out of breath running. We're carrying all the bad guys' weapons, or not all of them, some of them, because you wanted to make sure they didn't fall into other people's hands. And the dog was so amped up. I'd never seen him like that. He was shaking. He could barely walk because that was the first time he got to his job. So it was a wild night. It was a wild night, but you know, that's just that was part of the job. That's what you pray to be able to do, and you pray to come out on the other side with you and your friends intact. You and your teammates intact. Um, but you learn a lot about yourself in those situations, I think, too.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think that's probably a good segue into the next question. So you're out here with these guys, and there's an extreme level of trust that you have to have in that everyone that's on your team, that they know what to do, that they're going to do what they need to do when the time comes.
Mhm.
What would you say about the leadership aspect of doing work like that? For people that maybe are not familiar with the special operations side of things, for people that maybe haven't read this book, there was a great book by Jocko Willink and Leif Babin called Extreme Ownership. And by the way, anyone that's
Mhm.
watching the video right now, if you're a leader, I really think that all leaders should read that book because there's a big difference between being a leader and a boss. And your people will never respect a boss. They respect a leader. And when I read that book, some of the stories that Jocko and Leif talked about there were absolutely insane. And
Mhm.
the level of ownership, the level of trust that you have to have in your guys and that they have to have in you. What would you say about the leadership aspect of doing work like this?
Yeah, so I think a topic no one ever talks about, to be a good leader, yeah, you do have to have extreme ownership. I think, those guys talked about it in that book, but they don't talk about this aspect, being so secure in yourself that you can do that, because that's where most people fail, right? We have these insecurities that we've learned. We have these problem solving skills that we learned in ages 1 through 12, and that's all we've ever used, right? When somebody says we're stupid, we get upset about it, right? Because we're so insecure in our inner masculine or inner feminine. But I think to be a good leader, you have to be absolutely secure in yourself. You have to be grounded in yourself. But most of us, we live in this prefrontal cortex inside our identity. And our identity is all from these learned experiences rather than from our higher consciousness, our subconscious, which has so much more breadth and width from which to draw from as far as experience goes. And anybody that's been in a gunfight knows this. You don't think, you react. You are completely in the moment, in the present moment, like Eckhart Tolle talks about in The Power of Now. You are completely present. And in that complete presence, time stops, right? Because there is no, you see everything. Your vision opens up, you see everything, time opens up, and you're completely focused on this experience right now. But what most people, especially bad leaders, do is they live in their mind. And so, like, I can't believe this guy talked to me like this, instead of seeking to understand other people, instead of being secure in themselves, um, in their higher divine masculine, whatever you want to call it, being grounded in their self to be a good leader, to step into that role and lead from within rather than from this head, from the inner critic, right? How dare he talk to me like that? How dare he insult me? I'm the boss. Why would they talk to me like this? Right? Do what I said and not what not what I do, like that kind of stuff. That's all from insecurity, right? And you see this with, I see this with couples. I see that, this was me in my relationship too. Because if you want to be a good leader, like learn how to lead your family first, because that's where a lot of that emotion, is held. You can see somebody get triggered real quickly with their family, you know, but to be a good leader, I think it takes, this, uh, getting out of your head and being grounded in your not your identity, in your true self. And I'm not trying to talk foo-foo here. This is what science is showing now. If you ever read books like The Rise of Superman or The Masculine in a Relationship or the things like that, or even The Power of Now, like this is what they're talking about. You're drawing from a higher consciousness rather than this all these learned habits of that come with this insecurity as people, because we're worried about people judging them, we're worried about judging ourselves, we're worried about what other people will think, we're worried about whatever, right? But the higher self doesn't worry about that. It's just in the moment.
Yeah, that
I
makes
don't know.
sense. And
Maybe I'm rambling.
I like that you brought up the some of the books. Eckhart Tolle, yeah, that great author, by the way, and that's a great point on leadership because I'm sure everyone watching has probably dealt with leaders at some point or bosses at some point that they were like that.
Mhm.
They take offense to everything and they don't try to zoom out. They're too close to the trees to see the forest, and they're not looking at the bigger picture of why someone might be saying something that they are. So
Yeah.
yeah, I
Or,
like
or
that.
even questioned as a leader, right? I think that happens a lot. Um, I I can't tell you how many times, we would be on the ground and we would get orders from somebody back in the office, back at this, command. to go do something. We're like, that doesn't make any tactical sense. We're risking men's lives to do that. And they can't see the big picture. But because we questioned them, they're going to stick to their guns. And, we ended up doing it, and it could have been terrible, So like, that's the leadership I'm talking about. I think a lot of times people don't have the humility to listen to each other and to step into their their grounded self to be able to be that leader. But it does take some work. It takes some self-work to get over those identities as you step into these new roles as a leader.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would like to get into a little more of the philosophical side of things, especially because of your unique experience doing the work that you did.
Yeah.
So we're living in an interesting time in our society right now where I think there's a lot of people that are lost. They're not sure what it is that they're looking for. They are they're digging deep. I really do think that a lot of people are digging deep to try to find some sense of purpose. I think a lot of people are having trouble finding it, whether or not
Yeah.
they will ever get over that hurdle. Maybe at some point they'll be able to. So I think this be a good time to talk about the deep thinking part of some of the stuff that goes along with this job, or really any other kind of career for that matter. When a guy is looking at going into special operations, let's say he's 20 years old, just got out of high school, and he's been thinking a lot about what he wants to do for the future. And he's looking at this and he's thinking, I could get a lot of purpose out of this. Kind of like you thought, this is something that I really want to do. I get to work with great people, do a lot of fun stuff. And they're thinking, they're in their mind thinking, I want to have a family, but I also want to do this as a career. And I'm sure there's a lot of guys that go into this and they maybe re-up once, but I'm sure there's probably a lot of guys that go and they do it for 4, 6, 8 years and then they're out.
Mhm.
But guys like you did it for an entire career. And so a person is struggling in their mind, thinking, do I have to sacrifice my entire family life to build a solid career? And then by the time I get out at, let's say, 40 or 50, at that point, maybe it's too late to start a family. Or do I just go for it and start a family? Because you did a lot of combat deployments, so you spent a lot of time away from family. What would you say to people who they're struggling with that inner doubt? They want to get that sense of purpose and meaning out of life through their work, but they also want to have a family, and they're conflicted if which one they should pick, or could they have both?
Well, I'll tell you right now, there are no hard and fast rules on any of this. So the first thing I think is important for people to understand that we don't live in a bubble. So one does not mean you cannot have the other, right? So it doesn't mean you can't have a family if you get into special operations. You can absolutely have a family. Where people falter is they are not clear what they want out of their family, right? So I think there's, what did Joe Dirt say? Like life is a garden, you got to dig it, right? Um, I think that's a funny way to bridge into this, but the reality is like there are many aspects to life, and if you don't water them and if you don't nurture them and take care of them, one of those aspects or all of those aspects will falter, right? And so what I think it's good to do is just with any, I learned this a lot in business too. Like anytime you get into a relationship, whether it's with other people, as a lover, whatever, like there's got to be clear rules and clear expectations from everybody. So we know what we're getting into, what we're going to get from them, what they're going to get from us, right? So to back up into your question, should someone pick one or the other? Well, be clear what you want. Like, what do you want out of getting into special operations? And then what do you want about having a family? If you really want a family, then you need to be clear about that with your significant other. Like, hey, I got into special operations, or I'm getting into special operations. I may be gone quite a bit. It's going to take a lot of time. It's going to put a lot of stress on me. I want you to know this as we're getting into this, right? I love you very much and I want you to be a part of this. But at the same time, you have to understand that this is going to, there are going to be times when I won't be around for you. Um, me and my wife had that conversation going in, and she was okay with it. She wanted to be a part of that. She wanted to be a part of, with me for that. And so we stuck it out and we made it work. But we had to get clear about what we wanted. I had to get clear about what I wanted out of my career. I had to get clear about what I wanted out of my relationship, out of what I want out of myself, out of my kids, out of my business. And you have to renew those. You have to renew those regularly. Otherwise, you will forget them. They say every night, if you don't renew them every 90 days, you start to lose focus and you start to veer off in other directions, right? And so if you can renew those, I say renew them every morning. Write down your goals every morning. What do you want? What do you want out of life? And there's a really cool exercise. It comes in a book called Millionaire Success Habits. Really cool book. Whether you want to be a millionaire or not, doesn't matter. These are some success habits that a lot of successful people use. But one of them is he talks about the 7 levels of why. And so most people don't even know why they want something. And so that's what I would do the 7 levels of why for each aspect of your life. Like, you'll find out, you'll get deep, right? So if you say, hey, I want to buy a McLaren, right? A really nice car. And why do you want to buy a McLaren? Well, because I like how they drive. Okay, so you like the speed, you like the technology behind it. Why does that, why do you like that? And you just keep going deeper and deeper. The first 3 to 4 questions or answers you're going to get are typically superficial. They're up in your head. But as you get deeper and deeper, it's going to be in your heart. And you're going to see, do you really want it for a healthy reason? Like, do I want to be in special operations? Here's one. A lot of guys want to be in special operations because the status, right? Men, we seek status. I don't care how you put it. We seek status. We want other people to think we're strong. We want other people to know that we're what we're capable of. Like that is a huge part of why we do things, why we dress a certain way, why we act a certain way. And being in special operations, it gives you credibility at some shape or form, right? And people enjoy that. And I know I've been subject to that as well. But as you get deeper, there's going to be other reasons, right? If it's just for status, you're probably going to fail. You're probably not going to do very well, right? And you probably won't come across very well to the other team guys either that are in it for other reasons. But if you keep going deeper and deeper, maybe it has something like for me, it had something to do with, I know it had something to do with my father abandoning us when I was a kid. You know, I wanted to be the best man for my family ever. And I wanted to never be afraid. And that was a big piece for me. I've done this exercise and that's why I know this stuff. But I got beat up a lot as a kid. I was bullied. Went to school, new schools. I was always the new kid. Like that, like those things were drivers for me. So I never wanted to be afraid again. So I wanted to do the most dangerous shit I could find to overcome my fear of combat, of being beat up, of all the things that I was afraid of as a kid, and prove myself to my family. And so you go through that 7 levels and you get to a point where it's very emotional. And that's when you know you found your why. But I suggest people do it with all, 5 or however many aspects they have in their life, their family, their job, their self, their health, right? Why do you want to look the way you want to look? Right? Like all those aspects and tie those in and have post those above your desk, as I think Grant Cardone talks about, like review your goals every day right before you go to bed and right as you wake up. And let everything you do that day be tied to one of those goals. Because if it's not, as the Chinese say, like, if you don't know where you're going, any path will take you there and you'll end up wherever, looking back, thinking, I wasted all my life.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. So the next aspect that I would like to touch on,
Mhm.
special operations, and this goes for, I'm sure, infantry and guys that are, you're going out on a convoy, but especially special operations because you're seeing a lot of you're getting up there in the fight. I think so you were talking about like how a lot of guys want to get in special ops. They want there's the mystique, the
Mm.
status.
Yeah,
You're elevated to a certain level above whether or not people want to admit it. You're given a different status than a lot of other people that you meet out on the street in everyday life.
sure.
And I think people think a lot about that aspect, but maybe not so much about the mortality aspect. Because every time you go out on a mission, you're going up to the roulette table and you're all in. And sooner or later, you're going to lose everything. And I don't know that a lot of people put as much thought into that before they even join. Maybe it starts to hit them as they're going through and doing stuff. But when they're looking at signing up and they haven't thought about the mortality aspect, this mission I'm going out on, it's 2 a.m. This might be the last day, that last couple hours of my life. What would you say, like, I guess, how did you come to terms with that aspect of things?
There's a samurai quote that says, you must die before going into battle. And then you can fight with the freedom and, what is it, veracity, I don't know, ferociousness that you can, because then you don't worry about all the other stuff, right? I'm not saying that you need to do that necessarily, but I would say the guys that think about death, that think about being in accidents, that think about getting shot or blown up, that fear that, uh, well, let's look at it like this. I don't want to get too, foo-foo, but you do create every scenario you're in. And if you continue to think like this could be my last mission, this could be the last time I put on a pair of pants because I get my legs blown off, or they could be the last time I see my family, like you're opening you're opening yourself to that experience. And the reason I say that is because there's this interesting study based on, and I get into this stuff. There's this interesting study based on you and your subconscious, the reticular activating system, reticular RAS, if you ever heard of that. So your conscious mind can process, that's your identity, your inner critic, like all that stuff. It can process, I think it's like 50 to 100 bits of information per second on a good day, right? That's not very much when you consider the subconscious mind can process around 11 million bits of information per second. And so if you're programming your conscious mind by saying things like, this is how you manifest things in your life, believe it or not. This is scientific stuff. This is how you manifest things. If you program into your conscious mind, you keep saying things like, I could die, I could get shot, what's going to happen to my family? Now your RAS, reticular activating system, which is at the base of the skull, which filters out all this information that is coming in through the five senses, it's only focused on the things you programmed your subconscious mind or your conscious mind to find, right? There's an amazing story in the book Blink. And they talk exactly about this. These firefighters go in this house. There's smoke seeping through the floorboards. There's like all sorts of different things happen. People screaming. But the oldest firefighter who'd been on a lot of different calls, he's like, something's wrong. We got to get the hell out of this house. And he gets everybody out. He doesn't know why. He just had a bad feeling. I got to get out of here, right? And he gets everybody out. And minutes later, the whole house collapses because there was a fire in the basement. Nobody knew. That's what happens when you use the conscious mind, the subconscious mind that can filter in all this information, but your prefrontal cortex can't understand it because it's too much information. But when you go with that, when you step out of that identity, all of a sudden you can manifest things that are even bigger and better and right. But again, if you are saying, I might get shot, I might get blown up, I might get this and that, and you're thinking that over and over and over, you're programming what your brain filters out and what comes to the forefront of your mind. And so what happens? You start to see those instances and you walk yourself right into it. I'll give a great example. On that very night that I talked about, I don't know, 20 minutes ago, I engaged my targets and I moved to the right. I was on the far edge. I moved to the right. And I was about to keep walking forward because there was another guy running away and our dog was chasing him. And I was thinking about, taking a shot, but I was going to move forward to do it. But then I stopped. At the same time I stopped, the guy to my left put his hand on me and stopped me as well. He put his hand on my chest. So I was going to stop either way. He was going to stop, but we both had for some reason, thought to stop. And right as that happened, a bunch of rounds skipped right in front of me. I don't know how or why I stopped. He doesn't know how or why I stopped. The firing was over. It should have been over. But you pick up on things when your intent is to come out on top, is to be a winner, stay alive, to be healthy, right? That is your intent. And you're filtering out all that information that will drive you into that situation. And this is manifestation 101. Like a lot of people want to say, oh, you think about it and you attract things with your thoughts. You absolutely do, but it's not so much you attract, you find them. You find them. It's the whole, that whole exercise where they say, all right, look around the room, write down everything that's blue on a piece of paper. And now look at your piece of paper and tell me everything you saw that was red. You won't remember anything that's red unless it's glaringly, right, in your field of vision. But you won't remember any of the red things because your mind was filtering out all the blue things and only picking up on the blue things. So again, if you inundate your mind with all this negative self-talk, this could be my last mission. I could get my legs blown off. I might never see my family again. You are essentially programming your mind to find those things and put yourself in those situations. So again, it's about being intentional. All that to say.
Yeah, so basically what I'm getting out of this is it's kind of like we talked about earlier with training, the guys that would get injured, or they talk about how they were injured and then they go see the doctor. So you start thinking it and then it just basically becomes a reality. So it sounds like what you would tell people is you need to make peace with this ahead of time before you even sign up. Just realize that it could happen and then just move on and
Yeah.
focus with the rest of the stuff you need to do.
I'm going to say something even worse. I'm going to say, don't accept that it can happen. Do not accept it. You've already accepted your failure at that point. There's a great saying. It's like, you can never fail if you never stop, but you can never win if you never start, right? And that is the reality. If you start thinking about failure like that, nah, don't accept that. Like there is no such thing as failure. I'm going to keep going until we win. And that's it. There's just lessons. I'm going to learn or I'm going to win. That's it. Um, this is tough. It's going to be a tough one to swallow because nobody wants to say that I'm responsible for getting my legs blown off. And I might get a lot of flack for this. And I'm not saying you're responsible. I think it is an unconscious learned reaction that we are taught. But the reality is like, this is a lesson, right? Everything. I had a guest on my podcast, and he was one of those highly enlightened, very spiritually developed human beings. And he said, life is about joy and growth, right? And if you're not in joy, you should be growing. And every source of pain in your life is an area you need to grow until you feel joy in that area. And so I think the guys that hold on to their identity the longest, the hardest, they're the ones that struggle the most. And I just got off a call with a buddy of mine. We were talking about because yet another one of our friends committed suicide, a teammate. That's a huge piece of it. People hold on to this and they can't let it go. And then all of a sudden they're out of their job and they no longer have an identity. But this is a point of growth. Like they have to grow through that to blossom into the human being that they can be. That's where these points come from. But honestly, like I never accept might be my last. I never accepted. My wife used to make me promise me you won't get hurt, promise me you won't die. And that was an honest to God thing we would say every time I left. I promise you, honey, I will not die. And that was always my intent. That was always my intent. I'm gonna come home. I'm gonna do my mission. I'm gonna do the best of my ability. I'm gonna be there for all my teammates. And I was not one to shy away from it. I ran into every gunfight I went into. I'm not bragging. That is just the mentality I had at the time. It's and like that is it. You cannot accept that. Accepting failure or death before it happens, I don't think is the right attitude personally. That was never um I never accepted that.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's actually a good way of looking at it. I remember I read a book. This was quite a few years ago. It was called The Urban Monk. And I was
Mm.
just starting to get into reading at the time. This was probably close to 10 years ago. Now, I've been out of college for quite a while and hadn't really picked up any books. And one part of the book was he was talking about how imagine, just zoom out and imagine you are kind of floating and you're watching your own funeral. You watch your death, you watch your funeral. Because I think a lot of people I don't think they give enough thought to it. I do like that outlook, and I do think that's a good way of looking at it. I do think that considering what the end of your life is going to look like in some ways can also be good, because I think in some ways I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on it. I think in some ways it can help you, it can push you to go out and start doing things that you know you need to do or you want to do, but you've been holding off on doing it because you're creating this imaginary scenario in your head about why you shouldn't do
Mhm.
it. You're not qualified. You don't think that you can do it. But then you realize the clock is running and you got to get started at some point.
Yeah. No, I do think that's a great practice. I have seen that in other, I mean, every deployment before you leave, you are required to fill out your will. And I don't think a lot of people in civilian life are meant, made to do that, but it does give you a bit of clarity. And I think this goes back to it, right? I never had any intention. I forced all those thoughts out of my head about I might come back without a leg, with dead, whatever. I never thought about that stuff except for those moments. Now, but what you're talking about is an exercise you do to get clarity on your life. How do you want people to talk about you when you die? What are the things you want to be proud of? What do you like? How do you want to come across? And I've done that exercise where you write your own obituary. I think that is a very powerful thing to stir people into passion and purpose in their life. Absolutely. I think that's a great thing to do. But I'm just saying, in the reality of going to war, I don't think you should say entertain those thoughts for too long, right? Because the gravity of being in those situations will make you start to actually visualize those experiences. The exercise you're talking about, I think, is more for spurring people into taking action in their life. And I think it's a very powerful exercise. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So I think we'll end off on this. So after you've had your career in special operations, I'm sure the way that you looked at life, you picked up certain perspectives of how you look at things and what your daily life looks like and how you think about things long term. What did your time in the military and your time in special operations cause to make you think differently about how life is?
Well, I think life is precious, but I do think it is about growth. And I think the hardships we put ourselves in, they're going to make you grow faster. You often see the people that have the most clarity are the people that have been through the hardest stuff, right? And so I think you should seek out things that are difficult, right? Um, Consciously, not unconsciously. Like, I think you should step into things because they are hard, because that is a muscle we need to train. I see more and more people in America, and I think you touched on this, and they're drift from thing to thing, unfocused. There's no passion, there's no purpose in their life. They don't know what they want. So they end up joining some type of movement, we'll say like Antifa or Black Lives Matter. And I'm not saying those are bad organizations. I'm just saying things like that take advantage of people that do not have any direction in their life, do not have passion and purpose in their life, and they're looking for a fight. Because when we have a fight in front of us, that gives us purpose, right? And a lot of us want that fight. We want to find fight. For me, it was 9/11. That was my fight. That is what shaped me as a man. A lot of young adults are looking for that fight now, and so we fight our parents, we fight the government, we fight the police, whatever. I don't think that's the answer, but I understand it. I understand why people do that. That's why I think people should get in the habit of taking on hard things, because later on in life, you won't, when you are faced with the first real hard thing, you won't buckle and turn around and run to the next shiny object, right? You see this in colleges now. People cannot stick to one uh to one, what's it called? Uh they can't focus on one, course of study.
Like,
And they go from different one to different one. But like, you see it with jobs too. And so that's it's a muscle, right? You do have to practice that muscle with taking on something hard, sticking to it, and becoming the person that can be successful. It's not what you do that makes you successful, it's the person you become in the process, right?
there's a saying that says it's not the hardest part about becoming a millionaire. It's not making your first million. It's becoming the person worthy of $1 million. And I think that's very true of any aspect. You want to be a good father, you have to become the person that is a good father. It's not what you do, right? Your kids can pick up on that. It's who you are, who you become. Same thing in business, same thing in the military. I'll tell you, the guys that are fake, they get people know. People pick them out real soon. They don't last very long. Um, so yes, I think that's a powerful muscle we need to exercise in today's world. Pick something hard, stick with it, get it done, and then move on. Then move on. Once you figured it out, become that person. Move on. It's only gonna make you a better person in everything you do. Um, and plus, you crave it. Everybody craves it. We crave challenges. We crave that growth. That's why people do marathons and these different like obstacle courses and stuff like that. Like that's why we do that stuff. Um, it brings value to our self value, in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think this was a great podcast. I think we had a great discussion, and I think the audience will like this one. Where can
Good.
people find you, and I guess what are you working on right now?
So I'm all over LinkedIn. We're on Instagram, we're on TikTok, obviously, it's just for my business mainly. I also have a website, but you can find me on LinkedIn at Ashton Levarek, Lev as in Victor, Arek. But our website is www.valkyriegroup.com, excuse me. And that's spelled Valkere. It's an anagram of my last name, valkyriegroup.com. And then we have a lot of the projects we're working on there. I have my podcast. I have, our masterclass where we coach guys to reach financial freedom through Airbnbs and things like that. But yeah, I'm always happy to share. And if you reach out on LinkedIn, I'm happy to talk.
Awesome. Sounds good. Well, I hope you enjoyed the podcast episode. If there's any particular topic you'd like me to discuss on the next one, I'd go ahead and let me know down in the comments. Let me know what you thought of this one. And I've got plenty more guests lined up. So I think you're going to like the future episodes coming up. And I hope you enjoyed this one. I appreciate the support as always, and I will see you guys in the next one.